September 25th, 1396. The largest Christian army ever assembled, over 100,000 warriors from across Europe, faced the Ottoman Empire in what would become known as the Last Great Crusade. By sunset, it would be remembered as one of the most catastrophic military disasters in European history. Welcome to Ancient Battlefield. Today we're uncovering the shocking true story of the Battle of Nicopolis, where French arrogance and Ottoman brilliance combined to end the crusading era forever. The stage was set by the relentless Ottoman expansion into Europe under Sultan Bayezid III, known as Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. The Ottomans had already conquered much of the Balkans, and their siege of Constantinople seemed to spell doom for the Byzantine Empire and all of Christendom. King Sigismund of Hungary, desperate to halt the Ottoman advance, sent envoys across Europe calling for a new crusade. The response was overwhelming. From France came the flower of chivalry, led by Jean de Nevers, son of the Duke of Burgundy. From the Holy Roman Empire came thousands of German knights. Venice contributed its naval power, while England, Poland, and other kingdoms sent their best warriors. This wasn't just an army. It was the greatest gathering of European nobility in a generation. The French contingent alone included the Count de la Marche, the Marshal Boucicaut, and dozens of other great lords. They brought with them the finest armor, the most expensive weapons, and absolute confidence in their superiority over the infidel Turks. The Christian strategy seemed straightforward. March down the Danube, relieve the fortress of Nicopolis, which was under Ottoman siege, and drive the Turks back into Asia, where they belonged. What could possibly go wrong when the combined might of Christendom marched together? Everything, as it turned out. The problems began before the army even reached the enemy. The French knights, believing themselves the finest warriors in the world, openly disdained their Hungarian and Wallachian allies as cowards and incompetents. They refused to coordinate their movements or accept Sigismund's strategic advice, viewing him as a mere barbarian king, despite his extensive experience fighting the Ottomans. When the Crusader army reached Nicopolis, they found it strongly fortified and defended, but the French were impatient for glory. Rather than conducting a proper siege, they demanded an immediate assault, convinced that Turkish resistance would crumble before their first charge. Sultan Bayezid, meanwhile, had been tracking the Christian advance with growing confidence. The Ottomans possessed something the Europeans lacked: a unified command structure, disciplined troops, and a leader who understood both strategy and his enemy's weaknesses. The night before the battle, as the Christian army camped in chaotic splendor with each national contingent keeping to itself, Bayezid was carefully positioning his forces. He had roughly 60,000 men, fewer than the Christians but better organized and commanded. The Ottoman battle plan was a masterpiece of tactical deception. Bayezid placed his irregulars and light cavalry in the front lines, not to win the battle, but to exhaust and disorganize the enemy. Behind them, hidden from Christian view, he positioned his elite Janissary infantry and heavy cavalry, ready to deliver the killing blow. As dawn broke on September 25th, the French knights could barely contain their eagerness for battle. Against Sigismund's desperate pleas for caution and coordination, they demanded the honor of leading the assault. Count Jean de Nevers declared that the French would charge first, or not at all. The French heavy cavalry, perhaps 3,000 of the finest knights in Europe, thundered forward in a magnificent but tactically disastrous charge. Their steel-clad horses and riders presented an awesome sight as they crashed into the Ottoman front lines, scattering the irregular troops like leaves before a storm. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed like the old magic of the Crusades still worked. The French knights carved through the Ottoman first line and began pursuing the fleeing enemies up the slopes beyond. But this was exactly what Bayezid had planned. As the French cavalry became exhausted and disorganized, chasing scattered enemies up difficult terrain, they suddenly found themselves facing fresh Ottoman heavy cavalry and elite janissaries positioned on the high ground. The hunters had become the hunted. The French knights, their horses blown and their formation shattered, were systematically destroyed by disciplined Ottoman forces fighting from superior positions. Count Jean de Nevers was captured, the Marshal Boucicaut was taken prisoner, and hundreds of the finest nobles in France were killed or captured. Meanwhile, the rest of the Christian army descended into chaos. Without their French spearhead, morale collapsed. The various national contingents began blaming each other for the disaster, and what should have been an organized retreat became a panicked rout. King Sigismund, seeing the battle was lost, fought his way to the Danube and escaped by boat, but most of his army was not so fortunate. The Ottomans pursued the fleeing Christians for miles, capturing thousands of prisoners and seizing enormous quantities of treasure and equipment. The aftermath was even more horrific than the battle itself. Sultan Bayezid, enraged by what he saw as Christian treachery and the earlier massacre of Ottoman prisoners, ordered the execution of virtually all captured nobles, except for the highest-ranking ones who could pay enormous ransoms. The human cost was staggering. Contemporary sources suggest that perhaps 20,000 Christians died in the battle and its aftermath, including much of the military nobility of France and Hungary. The psychological impact was even greater. This had been the last great effort of united Christendom against the Ottoman Empire, and it had ended in complete disaster. The Battle of Nicopolis marked the effective end of the crusading era. Never again would European powers unite in such numbers to fight the Ottomans. The defeat confirmed Ottoman dominance in the Balkans and opened the path for their eventual conquest of Constantinople in 1453. For France, the disaster at Nicopolis was a national trauma that contributed to the military reforms that would eventually produce the victories of Joan of Arc. For the Ottoman Empire, it was proof that European heavy cavalry, no matter how brave or well-equipped, could be defeated by superior tactics and discipline. The battle also demonstrated the fatal flaw in medieval European military thinking: the belief that individual courage and noble birth could overcome superior strategy and organization. The age of the knight-errant was ending, and Nicopolis was its funeral pyre. The last crusade had ended not in the liberation of the Holy Land, but in the muddy fields beside the Danube, where the flower of European chivalry learned too late that valor without wisdom is merely a path to glorious destruction.